my current location, I'm at the ECOWAS Parliament complex, where I have the privileged presence of the Honourable Speaker of the ECOWAS Parliament himself, distinguished Senator Ike, who is also the Deputy Senate President for the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Distinguished Senator, Honourable Speaker, all in one voice. Pleased to meet you. It's to have you here.
You're welcome.
To have you here. Now, it's, of course, when I listened to your opening address, you know, it was quite, well, invigorating. And I look at that and I say, your immeasurable advocacy strides, especially at initiatives and enhancing capacity, was also outlined in that address. What actually came to me was your emphasis, of course, of the summit, which just happened at France, talking about dealing with a common enemy. How was that summit for you?
Well, thank you so much. It was much a welcome development for me at international level. We're beginning to address the issue of insurgency in the sub-region. But I believe that having taken that stride, it's also important that we look inwards, see how we can bring in the leaders of not just ECOWAS, but the Central African region, so that because we can all find a common solution to what I consider to be a common problem. Yes, France have done a good job, bringing Nigeria and their neighbors to discuss, to have a conversation, which is leading to contribution of troops to monitor the borders, and find a way of checking these insurgents. But I think ultimately it is important that the chairman of the Authority of Heads of State himself will convene a meeting of the heads of state of the sub-region, together with the other neighboring countries within the Central African region, including Cameroon, Chad Republic, and so on and so forth. So they need to come in and decide on their own to deal with this situation, and this is the only way we can deal with it. Because if you go to a place like Chad, they hawk AK-47 on the street, so we need to find a way of checking it. So the same thing in Niger Republic. It's difficult for the government there to deal with the arms runners there. So there need to be an international effort to deal with it, holistically at a regional, and the inter-regional level. So that's, I think, the next step we need to take. But I commend the initiative of meeting in France.
All right. Now, the Senegalese delegate during the plenary session today, during her report, said something, with relevance, and she specifically said she was really happy, talking about your initiative, talking about the instead of an ECOWAS of states and the people's ECOWAS.
Yes.
This is what you've just buttressed. But permit me to just talk about the extraordinary session of the ECOWAS Parliament, which happened May 2013. Of course, the two-day dialogue session in Accra, Ghana, and that took place as well. What was the focus of that as well?
We are looking at the constraints, at the borders, that also affects the interstate commerce, the problem of free movement of people, because we have a protocol on free movement of people. But we've discovered that it's only observing the breach. People find it difficult to cross from one border to the other. So we need to look at what the reasons behind this. What of the corruption side of it? People have to pay money to pass through the borders, of various states, within those corridors. So we felt that, look, we need to find out what is the reason. What can we do to ensure that this is addressed? Of course, we believe that it's also important for us to increase, the trade between our respective states. We discover that most times the trade volume, of say Nigeria and the rest of the world is higher than the trade volume between Nigeria and the other ECOWAS countries. So we need, first of all, to find a way of reducing this gap, to ensure that we increase the volume of trade amongst ourselves, so that we increase the economic capacity of our people, increase the well-being of our people. Also, it will also have a multiplier effect on the general well-being of the people. So that's what actually was the emphasis. The issue of trade liberalization and issue of border crossing.
Okay, so that's talking now, because it just brings me to my next question here, the emphasis on the need to evolve strategies to tackle the non-implementation of the community text on regional policies. All right. Now, Mali this year started with a team called Tackling Corruption, which that was their centrifugal focus. And listening to the report during the plenary session as well, they focused more on the Section B on general elections. Now, some of the problems that they brought up was the non-participation of women in elections, even though that they have encouraged it. But do you think that Mali, at this point of healing, especially coming from a place where they had obtuse violence, is ready for a gender-sensitive democracy, coming out of just that anarchy that just happened?
Well, definitely. Don't forget that within the sub-region, we have a lot of Muslims, just as we have Christians as well. And customarily, the Muslims, have felt a lot reserved.
Okay.
So the issue of elections for them is for the men. So that's a major constraint. That's a major issue. So there's this need for a lot of sensitization, a lot of education, a lot of enlightenment, that can enable the women to vote. Because the way the household is situated in most of these countries is that women mostly stay at home. Mostly don't do another work. And when you come to register women, you find it extremely difficult to go into the inner recess of the house to have these women registered. And you have to register to vote. So all these things are things we need to resolve, so that women can have effective participation. So there's a lot of advocacy that need to be done, especially in emerging democracies, those who are just coming out of a war situation, conflict situations, And don't forget that they have been traumatized, so they seem to be withdrawn. So over time, I'm sure they're going to overcome some of these psychological problems, and that's where the psychologists come in. That's where the issue of advocacy comes in, and everybody needs to bring in, a whole lot of effort to ensure that these guys or these women are, sensitized enough to participate in the political process, not just as voters, but also participant contestants. There'll be, candidates, for these elections. So it's important that they also be informed that they have the right not only to vote, but also to be voted for.
All right. Now, you've spoken about Mali. Mali is just one cross-section of what, talking about women and politics. I know that you're aware that 43 out of the ECOWAS policies, protocol for Senegal has been ratified, out of the 54, and still women in election is still in progress. But when you come down to Nigeria, the urban culture of the nature of the democracy still is a little partisan to women in politics and their gender. Now, when people say women are the weaker sex, a lot of people, especially men, will say that when it comes to politics is ideal. Do you think that Nigeria is also practicing, that equality when it comes to political participation for women?
Well, I may have a different response, from the rest of the people. I believe that women have done extremely well in politics, given where they're coming from. And if you look at the dynamics, of women's progression in professions, you can see that they're catching up and overtaking men in most respects. If you look at the teaching profession, it started with men, it's been overtaken by women. If you look at the law profession, it started with men, it has been taken by women. If you look at medical profession, the same thing. So politics, they're catching up and suddenly they will take over. So in 1999, I think we have basically 1 or 2 female senators. But today we have over 10, And House of Reps is something. In State Assembly, you have women who have been speakers. So today we have a number of women who are deputy governors. So I believe in 2015, you were going to see a revolution. Most likely, you might see a woman governor or women governors. You're also going to witness a number of women who come into the National Assembly. The number of women today in the federal executive is much more than what it was 4 years ago. 8 years ago, 16 years ago, and things like that. So I think we are beginning to witness a lot of improvement in women participation.
Okay.
So I'm quite optimistic that it will even get better. So it's not something you begin to legislate upon,
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Permit me to once again go back to the issue of insecurity and security,
Yes.
and this time still talking about Boko Haram, and the rest of the world is in solidarity with us, and with regards to the Chibok girls and finding them, but the issue of border control, especially for non-ECOWAS community, states, is also a worrying factor. How can still practicing the spirit of, trade and good governance with these other countries still be able to maintain our borders from being infiltrated by some of those people who would come from either the Islamic Maghreb or the Eastern African countries?
Well, you see, the problem here is that we are signatory to a number of international texts, that will forbid us from closing our borders. Like in the case of ECOWAS, we are signatory to ECOWAS Protocol on Free Movement, for instance. Now, so to close our borders will be an extreme situation, you need to consult with the rest of the countries within the sub-region for you to do that. But I believe that the alternative approach would be to bring them in resolving this problem, just as they've agreed in France that they're going to contribute troops to monitor the borders. So instead of closing the borders, let everybody come, let us monitor the borders. And don't forget that Nigeria have the very diverse borders, so a very broad borders. So it's going to be difficult for Nigeria alone to monitor this. So even if you say you close their borders, you're still going to find it difficult to monitor because it's very porous. So I think the ideal thing would be to bring in everybody, all the stakeholders, the people within the sub-region and the neighboring region, so that everybody will be part and parcel of this monitoring. And it's also important that we have to introduce, high-tech machines, to help us with some of this monitoring. So it's not just enough to go and put vehicles or put human beings there, because it's difficult to get the number of human beings that can police the borders. So it is important that we also introduce, high technology in dealing with this, so that we'll be able to monitor the borders, alongside the physical, presence of security personnel. Because it's important to do this, because these ammunition they are using, they don't just fly in, they pass through our borders. So with proper monitoring, you can control these things. Because I think the greatest problem we have is that these weapons they are using, they just get into Nigeria unchecked. So it's very important that we need to find a way of controlling the influx of these ammunitions.
All right. Finally, in that angle, before I ask you perhaps my last question, the Senegalese government is looking at an ECOWAS biometric identity card,
Yes.
as a part of ECOWAS passport which we have. Isn't it ideal to actually look at that as also part of identification process, especially if you're looking at database and control of the number of immigrants who cross our borders every day, because we see war in certain parts of Africa, and sometimes in Africa, Nigeria is the next point of shelter.
Yeah, the passport policy needs to improve. Yes, today we're using a common passport. About 13 or so of the 15 countries are using a common ECOWAS passport. Now, but you see, the truth is that the acquisition of passport is still by choice. So even if you have a database, it's only those who go to the passport office and seek for passport that you can capture their data, for instance, their biometrics. So, but if it is a composite thing, so that once you are born, you are required, expected, to have a passport. In that case, their biometrics will be taken. They have all the information about you. But as it is today, there's no such compulsion. So you are entitled to the passport. So, but it's a matter of choice. So if you go for the passport, they can capture all the information about you and then give you the passport. So I think it's important that beyond the passport, we should need to have an identity card that should be compulsory. So that in that manner, all the information regarding every person will be captured. Because sometimes this identity becomes an issue. You arrest some of the insurgents. The issue is whether it's a Nigerian, whether it's from Niger, whether it's from Chad. Sometimes some people were arrested. It has shown that they are not Nigerians. So how do you explain that? How do you verify that? It's difficult for somebody to determine that kind of facts without either a passport or an identity card, which have a regional implication.
All right. Finally, just before I congratulate you on the Hallowed Chambers, because I can see that you've really done a great work.
Thank you.
Evacuation centers. It's an emotional state of affairs for a lot of African countries. We see a lot of countries who, for instance, Central African Republic, some Nigerians who were part of that, unfortunate event had to come back to Nigeria to start all over again. And sometimes there is not enough environmental accommodation for them as refugees coming into Nigeria. How do we look at evacuation centers in Africa, especially in Nigeria, since we're the Horn of Africa?
Well, I think it's a major challenge for the whole of Africa. Yes, we have conflict situations, that produces people, displaced people, refugees and all that. But we've not taken conscious effort, made any conscious effort to build centers for such emergencies or humanitarian crises. So what happens is that when that happens, people are evacuated into maybe primary schools, secondary schools, and then children who ordinarily should be in school are displaced. So in some places they build centers, in case there is natural disasters or stuff like that, and then people can go to such shelters, and then they're taken care of. There's the provision of food, there is food, provision of water. But even in some of these schools, you discover that you don't have even sanitary situations, that can take care of that number of people. There's no provision for water that will deal with this. So you've got to find your hands in human crisis. So I think that going forward, we need to prepare for this, because all these things are inevitable. As long as we live, we're going to have conflict situations, we're going to have disasters, so we need to prepare for them. But we ask ourselves, with the level of poverty, in Africa, so people will now, I think the greater emphasis will now be to provide normal infrastructure, provide basic amenities and things like that. They don't want to worry about the future. So they deal with issues on contingency manners, so that when some situation arises, they begin to, to deal with it. So this has been the approach in governance in matters like that. But I think that because we've come to live with some of these situations of conflicts and disasters, it's now important that no matter the scale, we should be able to provide centers that can be able to take care of such people in case it happens. You may not take everybody, but if somewhere you can say, okay, we'll take this people, assuming the community now is raised down. So as some people run away, where are you going to take them to? Or say there is flood everywhere. So and people have left their houses. Then at night, when night comes, where will they sleep? And if they sleep there, how are they going to be sure that they have food and sure they will have water? So some of these things are things we have to envisage and create, at least in each local government, a place people can have shelter in case of crisis.
All right, thank you so much. But they say that children are the messages we send into the society that we cannot see. Children's Day is next week. What is your message for the Nigerian child at this moment, especially when they're very apprehensive about what's happening in the country?
Well, I would like to let them know that there is hope. We've had crises in the past in Nigeria, and we're able to pull through. I was a little kid when the war came, in the 60s. So I went through all the trauma, but somehow I put it behind me. I was able to go to school, and I was able to be part of the society. So what's going on now in Nigeria is just a passing phase. So definitely it will come to pass like every other thing. These two will pass, and then Nigeria will be great again, and they will have a great future.
Thank you so much. Cannot be better said. And he's now an honorable speaker of the ECOWAS Parliament. So he survived the war and became part of the government that makes the policies. Thank you so much. It's been a privilege.
You're welcome.
Been a privilege. All the best.
My pleasure.
All the best.